The billionaire CEO, Adrian Cole, hadn't smiled in 12 years. 12 years of crushing guilt after losing his sister, Lily, and his parents. But when a quiet, unremarkable new maid named Hannah walks into his life, everything changes. Her simple kindness cracks the fortress around his heart, leading him to an impossible discovery that will shake his foundation, his family, and the truth of who she really is. You won't believe what this maid did that changed him. Forever. Adrian Cole's fingers hovered over the keys of his computer, his eyes glazed over as he stared at the glowing screen. It was Christmas Eve. The clock on the wall ticked, marking the minutes as they bled into hours. A soft hum from the mansion's grand fireplace was the only sound that filled the enormous room. The fire's warm orange glow bounced off the marble floor, but the warmth felt distant to him, almost foreign. He sat alone in his study, draped in the weight of his success. Everything he'd ever wanted was right in front of him: the mansion, the cars, the endless riches. But as he sat in his chair, the coldness in his heart was undeniable. There was a heavy void inside him, something money had never been able to fill. He hadn't smiled in 12 years. 12 years since the night his sister Lily was taken from him. 12 years since the tragic car accident that claimed the lives of his parents while they searched for her. The loss still haunted him, guilt gnawed at him every day, a constant reminder that his wealth had come at a great personal cost. His parents' deaths, his sister's disappearance, these were wounds he carried alone. His staff were busy preparing for the holiday, but it meant nothing to Adrian. Christmas was just another day of isolation in his gilded cage. He had long stopped caring about the meaningless festivities. His heart was locked away, a fortress he had built to protect himself from the world. The knock on the door broke his trance. Adrian's head snapped up. "Come in," he called out, his voice flat. A woman stepped inside, a new maid. Adrian had barely noticed her in the past few days since she started working for him. She had replaced the old housekeeper who had retired. Her name was Hannah, though he hadn't paid attention to it. She was young, quiet, and unremarkable. She wore a simple maid's uniform, her hair tied back neatly, her hands clasped in front of her. "Mr. Cole, I thought you might want some tea," she said softly, setting a delicate porcelain teacup down on his desk, a faint smile on her lips. Adrian looked at her, his expression unmoving. "I don't need anything," he replied curtly, turning his gaze back to the screen in front of him. Hannah didn't leave. She stood there for a moment, her eyes scanning the room as if searching for something she could do to make him feel less alone. But she said nothing and didn't push. Instead, she placed a small plate of cookies next to the tea. "I just thought, it's Christmas Eve, sir. You shouldn't be alone." Adrian's eyes narrowed, irritation bubbling beneath the surface. "I've always been alone," he snapped, his voice sharp. He glanced at her quickly, then turned back to his desk. "Don't you have better things to do?" For a moment there was silence. Hannah hesitated, then quietly spoke, almost as though she wasn't sure if she should say it, but something in her heart pushed her forward. "I know what it's like to feel alone, but you don't have to be, Mr. Cole." Her words hung in the air for a beat before she turned and left the room, her steps soft on the polished floor. Adrian sat frozen, staring at the door she had just exited. His heart had skipped a beat at the unexpected tenderness in her voice. He quickly shook the thought away. It was foolish. The maid was just that, a maid, nothing more. He didn't need anyone, he didn't want anyone. But as the night stretched on and the hours crept by, Adrian couldn't shake the image of Hannah's face from his mind. There had been something in her eyes, something soft, but genuine. It had bothered him, and for reasons he couldn't quite explain, it had made his chest tighten in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. The mansion, with its towering walls and empty rooms, suddenly felt even colder. His wealth, his success, it was all meaningless in that moment. The fire crackled in the hearth, but it wasn't enough to chase away the hollow emptiness that had been growing inside him for years. Adrian reached for his glass of whiskey, staring into the amber liquid. He could almost feel the weight of the years pressing down on him, years spent locked away in his own grief, his own guilt. The world outside had moved on, but for him, it had all come to a standstill. Another knock on the door broke his thoughts. His heart gave a strange flutter, but he quickly pushed the feeling away. It was probably just the staff coming to remind him of some trivial thing. "Come in," he said, his voice sounding tired. Hannah stepped back into the room, looking hesitant but determined. She carried a small silver tray with a fresh pot of tea. "I thought you might want some company, sir, if you're feeling lonely." Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Something inside him stirred, a mix of frustration and something softer. He didn't need anyone, not now, not ever. But then, as he gazed at her, he realized something. There was no one else, no one left to reach out to him. He had pushed them all away, his family, his friends, anyone who had once cared for him. He had closed himself off from the world, believing he was better off alone. And now, here was this stranger offering him something he hadn't felt in a long time: kindness, genuine kindness. Not because she wanted something from him, not because she needed anything, but because she saw him, something he hadn't allowed anyone to do in years. "Leave it," he said quietly, his voice lacking the usual sharpness. "Thank you, Hannah." She nodded, though he could see the flicker of sadness in her eyes. Without another word, she set the tray down and quietly left the room again. Adrian stared after her, the soft click of the door closing behind her echoing in his mind. He didn't know what to think anymore. The coldness in his heart had begun to crack. Maybe it had been there all along, waiting for something to open it again. And just maybe, that something was this quiet, unassuming maid. The following days passed in a blur of work, but Adrian's thoughts kept returning to Hannah. He had never been one to dwell on the actions of the staff. He'd always kept them at arm's length, seeing them as nothing more than people fulfilling their duties. But there was something about her that was different. She didn't simply serve him, she saw him. Adrian tried to ignore it at first. He buried himself in his business, pushing his feelings aside as he had for years. But Hannah's soft voice, her quiet presence, stayed with him long after she had left the room. The next time their paths crossed, she was cleaning the hallway, her back turned to him. Adrian hesitated before speaking, unsure of what he wanted to say. "How long have you been working here?" he asked, his tone more casual than he intended. She glanced over her shoulder, offering a small, polite smile. "A few days, sir. I replaced the previous housekeeper." A few days. He had barely noticed her during that time, caught up in his own world of isolation. But something had shifted in him since their brief exchanges. She was there day after day, quietly going about her work. It was as if she belonged in the space in a way that made him feel less alone. "Do you enjoy it here?" he asked before he could stop himself. His question was an odd one he would normally never ask. But it was out now, and the silence between them lingered for a moment as she thought about her response. "It's peaceful," she said softly. "There's a lot of beauty in this place, but sometimes it feels a little too quiet." Adrian's brow furrowed slightly. He didn't know how to respond to that. His mansion, for all its grandeur, had always been empty to him. The silence never bothered him, not until now. "I'm not used to it either," he admitted. "Not the quiet." He glanced around, almost as if seeing the house for the first time. The echoing walls, the spacious rooms, the vast emptiness. His voice softened. "I lost someone a long time ago." Hannah stood still, sensing the shift in his tone. She could feel the weight of his words. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked away, as if the act of speaking about it had made the wound feel fresh again. It had been 12 years since his sister had disappeared, 12 years of silence and unanswered questions. His parents had died searching for her, and for years, Adrian had pushed all the memories of that night to the deepest parts of his mind. But now, in the presence of this young woman, it felt like something was stirring inside him, something he had buried for so long. "I had a sister," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She disappeared when I was a teenager. My parents died searching for her." Hannah, surprised by his openness, took a cautious step toward him. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. But Adrian wasn't sure why he felt compelled to continue. It wasn't like him to share this with anyone, much less with someone like her, a maid who had only recently entered his life. But somehow, her sincerity made him feel as though she could understand. Her name was Lily, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I've spent years trying to bury the pain, trying to fill the emptiness with work, with things that didn't matter, but it's still there. The guilt, the regret. Hannah's eyes softened with empathy and she stepped closer, though she didn't interrupt. She simply stood there, listening, letting him speak. I was supposed to protect her, Adrian continued, his voice faltering. And when she was taken, my world crumbled. My parents, they died in a car accident while trying to find her. After that, I threw myself into my work. I thought if I could just make enough money, I could fix everything. But it doesn't work like that. There was a long pause, and Adrian felt a lump form in his throat. He quickly cleared it, trying to regain his composure. I'm sorry, he muttered, shaking his head. I shouldn't be unloading this on you. But to his surprise, Hannah didn't look away. She didn't seem uncomfortable or put off by his words. She simply nodded, as if she understood the weight he carried. I don't think you should bottle it up, she said softly. Maybe it's time to let it out. Adrian met her gaze, and for a moment he felt seen in a way he hadn't in years. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a man with a mask on, hiding behind wealth and success. I don't know how to move forward, he confessed, his voice low. It feels like I've been stuck in this loop for 12 years. Hannah's expression softened. Sometimes, moving forward starts with acknowledging what's holding you back. Her words were simple, but they struck a chord with him. Maybe she was right. Maybe he had been too focused on trying to fix everything through his success, through external measures, without ever dealing with the internal wounds. He had been running from the truth for too long. Do you ever feel like you're just going through the motions? He asked, his voice trembling with vulnerability. Like nothing really matters anymore. Hannah nodded slowly, her eyes understanding. I think everyone feels that way sometimes, but it doesn't have to stay that way. The right people, they can help pull you out of it. Adrian didn't know why, but her words resonated with him. He was used to pushing people away, to keeping them at arm's length. But there was something about Hannah, the way she didn't judge him, didn't ask for anything in return, that made him feel like maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to be alone anymore. Hannah didn't expect him to open up again so soon, but the next morning when she entered the dining room to lay out breakfast, he was already there. He wasn't staring at paperwork or scrolling through emails. He was simply sitting in silence, his fingers drumming slowly against the polished table. When she approached, he lifted his eyes to her, and in them she saw something different from the usual cold detachment. There was exhaustion, but something gentler beneath it. Good morning, she said carefully, unsure what version of him she would meet today. He watched her set down the silverware, his eyes following her movements. Do you ever remember things you don't understand? He asked suddenly, catching her off guard. She straightened. What do you mean? Adrian leaned back, rubbing his forehead. Memories that don't feel real, or maybe they are real but distant, like they belong to another life. Her pulse quickened. She had vague memories like that, broken flashes of something she could never explain. A playground, a woman calling her name, a warm hand holding hers, but as always she pushed them down. I think some memories stay even when we try to forget them, she said quietly. He studied her face for a long moment. You speak like someone who knows. She hesitated. She didn't want to reveal too much, not when she didn't understand the pieces of her own past. I think everyone knows what it's like to feel lost, she said instead. Adrian nodded slowly, his expression softening as though her words had struck a chord. I wasn't always like this, he murmured, almost to himself. After Lily disappeared, it felt like the world had gone out of focus. My parents died chasing a ghost, and he shook his head. I became someone I barely recognize. Hannah placed the final napkin and turned to him. You're still human, Mr. Cole. You're allowed to hurt. He huffed a soft, humorless laugh. I haven't allowed myself to feel anything in a long time. She didn't know what to say to that. Instead, she turned to leave, giving him space, but his voice stopped her. Hannah. She looked back. Thank you, he said, the words sounding like they scraped against a throat unused to them. For listening. Her chest tightened strangely. You don't have to thank me. I do, he said quietly. People don't listen to me. They listen to the billionaire, not the man. She didn't know how to respond. She simply nodded, offering him a small smile before leaving the room. As she walked away, her mind buzzed with confusion. She had never met someone who carried so much pain so quietly, and she wasn't sure why she felt connected to him in ways she couldn't explain. There was something familiar about him, something buried in the depths of her memory, though she couldn't reach it. Later in the afternoon, she was polishing one of the framed photographs in the hallway when she noticed something she hadn't seen before. A picture of Adrian as a teenager, standing next to a younger girl. Her hair was tied in pigtails, her face round and bright, her smile wide. But what struck Hannah wasn't the smile. It was the small, faint scar above the girl's right eyebrow. Hannah froze. Her hand moved instinctively to the same spot on her own forehead, where a nearly identical scar sat. She had asked the people who raised her how she got it, but they never gave her a clear answer. They always brushed it off with a vague, "You fell when you were little." But that explanation had never felt right. Her stomach twisted as she stared at the photograph. The girl, Lily, had eyes that seemed to mirror hers. Something deep within Hannah stirred, a flicker of something old and painful, like a forgotten dream returning in fragments. She stepped back, her breathing shallow. Her hands trembled so badly she almost dropped the frame. Without thinking, she hurried away from the hallway and into her small room at the far end of the mansion. She shut the door behind her, pressing her back against it as her heart pounded violently in her chest. Her gaze darted to the small wooden box she kept on the bedside table. She had it for as long as she could remember. Inside, she knew, was the only thing she had carried with her from childhood. Her fingers shook as she opened the lid. A tiny bracelet lay inside, worn and faded. The kind a little girl would wear. And on its surface, barely readable after years of wear, were 4 letters engraved in tiny metal beads. Lily. Hannah sank onto the bed, the bracelet clutched against her chest. She tried to breathe, but her lungs refused to cooperate. The room spun around her as flashes of memories, unfinished, unclear, unfamiliar, flashed through her mind. A woman lifting her up and twirling her around. A man kneeling beside her, tying the bracelet on her wrist. A boy calling her little star. A scream. A van door slamming. Her own voice crying out for someone she couldn't see. She pressed her hands against her head, whispering, "What's happening to me?" A knock jolted her, and she scrambled to hide the bracelet. But before she could compose herself fully, the door opened slightly, and Adrian appeared in the doorway. "Hannah, are you all right?" You rushed off. She stiffened, her pulse hammering in her ears. I'm fine," she lied. "I just needed a moment." He stepped inside halfway, concern etched onto his face. "You look pale. Are you sick?" "No," she whispered, unsure how to look at the man who might be connected to her in ways she wasn't ready to understand. "I'm okay." He didn't look convinced, but instead of pressing further, he said, "Come to the main hall when you're ready. There's something I want to talk to you about." Hannah nodded slowly, watching him disappear down the hallway. As soon as the door clicked shut, she collapsed onto the bed again, clutching the bracelet. Her mind raced. She needed answers, but she feared those answers more than anything. When she finally stood and looked at herself in the small mirror on the wall, her hands were still shaking. The reflection of her own eyes stared back at her, eyes that suddenly didn't feel like they belonged to a stranger, but to a girl she had once been. And somewhere inside, a truth she wasn't ready to face was waking up. The days passed, but the conversation between Adrian and Hannah lingered in his mind. Every time he walked through the grand hallways of his mansion, he could still hear her voice in his head, urging him to move forward. The weight of his sister's disappearance, his parents' deaths, and the isolation he'd wrapped himself in felt more pressing than ever before. Adrian had always prided himself on being in control, on keeping his emotions buried beneath a well-crafted exterior. But lately, his walls seemed to be crumbling. Each interaction with Hannah chipped away at the fortress he had built around his heart, leaving him vulnerable in ways he wasn't accustomed to. As Christmas Eve approached again, Adrian found himself staring out the large windows of his study, watching the snow fall gently outside. The mansion was eerily quiet, just like it always had been. But this time, it wasn't comforting. It felt suffocating. The silence was louder than ever before, and for the first time in years, he could feel the emptiness in the pit of his stomach. He couldn't help but think of his family, of the years he'd spent without them. He thought of his brother, William, who had reached out to him with that message, offering a chance to reconnect. It was a gesture that, under normal circumstances, he would have brushed off. But this time, it stirred something in him. He had pushed everyone away for so long, but the truth was, he had never really given them a chance. The thought of Christmas dinner, of being with people who genuinely cared about him, felt almost foreign. For years, he had built his life around business and success, thinking it would fill the void left by his family's absence. But now, as he stood in the cold, empty room, he realized how much he had been missing. And it wasn't the money or the accolades. It was the connection, the love, the family. Adrian sat down at his desk and stared at his phone. He thought about the last message he had received from William. "We'd love for you to join us for Christmas dinner." It felt like a lifeline, but could he reach out? Could he take the step to mend the relationships he had long neglected? The walls he had built around himself seemed insurmountable, and yet something inside him told him this was the moment to change. Hannah, meanwhile, had noticed the change in Adrian as well. She had seen the way his posture had softened when they spoke, how his gaze lingered a little longer when he looked at her. There was still a barrier between them, but it was no longer impenetrable. It was like a crack had appeared, and now it was up to him to decide whether he would let the light in. She had always been able to read people well, a skill she had learned over the years of moving from place to place, trying to find a sense of belonging. But Adrian was different. She could see the pain behind his stoic expression, the loneliness he carried like a heavy burden. He was a man of immense wealth, yet the emptiness inside him was palpable. And for reasons she couldn't fully explain, she felt a deep empathy for him. One afternoon, as she was cleaning the study, she found herself watching Adrian from across the room. He sat at his desk, his head buried in paperwork, but there was a distant look in his eyes. He wasn't really focused on the work in front of him. He was lost in thought, somewhere far away. Hannah hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Mr. Cole," she said gently, her voice soft enough not to startle him. "Have you thought about calling your family? I know it's not easy, but they're still there. You don't have to carry this alone." Adrian's head snapped up, his eyes locking onto hers. There was a flicker of surprise in his gaze, quickly masked by a wall of indifference. But Hannah saw it, the brief moment of vulnerability that he couldn't hide. "I don't know if I can," Adrian replied quietly, the weight of his words hanging in the air. "You don't have to fix everything all at once," Hannah said, her voice calm but firm. "But you can start by reaching out. It's not too late." Adrian sat back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. Her words had struck him in a way he hadn't expected. He had spent so many years thinking that if he just focused on his career, on building his empire, he would find happiness. But it hadn't worked. Nothing had worked. He had buried himself in his work, thinking that success could fill the void in his life. But now, with Hannah's quiet encouragement, he realized that no amount of money or prestige would ever replace what he had lost: his family, his connection to others. "Maybe you're right," he muttered, more to himself than to her. He stared out the window again, the snow falling gently outside, but this time it didn't seem as cold. It seemed like a new beginning. Hannah smiled softly, sensing that this was a breakthrough. "I'll be here if you need someone to talk to," she said before turning to leave the room. Adrian watched her go, a strange sense of gratitude swelling in his chest. She had said so little, yet her words had given him more than he had received in years. Maybe he wasn't as alone as he thought. Maybe it was time to stop running. That night, as Adrian sat alone in his study, he found himself staring at the photo of his sister again, the one that had always haunted him. He hadn't allowed himself to think about her for so long, but now the memories were flooding back, uninvited and relentless. The image of her smiling face, full of life, seemed to mock him. He had failed her. He had failed his parents. And now he was left with nothing but the ruins of his own making. But in the midst of the pain, something shifted. He reached for his phone once more, his fingers trembling slightly as he dialed his brother's number. The ringing tone echoed in his ears, each second feeling like an eternity. When the call finally connected, Adrian hesitated. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know if it was too late. "Hello," William's voice came through, surprised but warm. "William," Adrian said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's me. I want to come home for Christmas." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and Adrian's heart began to race. But then, William's voice broke through the quiet, full of warmth and relief. "Of course, Adrian. We've been waiting for you." Adrian closed his eyes, feeling the weight of years of isolation beginning to lift. This wasn't just a phone call. This was a step toward healing, a step toward the connection he had been longing for. Adrian's heart was still pounding as he ended the call with William. It felt like he had just taken the first step on a long journey, and yet the weight of it all was overwhelming. For so many years, he had been trapped in his own head, convinced that he could only find peace by building his empire higher and higher. But now, that path felt like it had led him straight into a dead end. The following day, the mansion felt different. It wasn't just the soft glow of the holiday lights or the slight chill in the air. It was the change in Adrian himself. For the first time in ages, he felt a glimmer of hope. The chains of guilt and isolation that had held him for so long seemed to loosen, even if just a little. As he walked down the grand staircase, his thoughts drifted to Hannah. It had been days since their conversation, but her words had stayed with him. "You don't have to do it alone." She had been right, of course. His success had never been about the money. It had always been about the people he had pushed away. Adrian glanced at his phone, wondering if he should call William again. The desire to reach out, to make up for the years he had wasted, was strong, but something held him back. The fear of being rejected, of not being able to fix everything, still lingered in the back of his mind. He had failed his family once. What if they didn't want him back? What if it was too late? But before he could linger on those thoughts, a knock on the door interrupted him. He sighed and walked to the door, not particularly in the mood to entertain any visitors. But when he opened it, there stood Hannah, holding a tray with a steaming cup of coffee. "I thought you might like this, Mr. Cole," she said softly, offering the tray with a small smile. Adrian's gaze lingered on her for a moment. There was something so calm about her presence. Unlike anyone else in his life, she didn't demand anything from him. She simply existed, a quiet, steady force of kindness in a world that had long been nothing but chaos and pressure. "Thank you," he said, his voice softer than he had intended. She nodded, stepping inside with a quiet grace. "I know you've been through a lot, but I wanted to remind you that you don't have to face it alone." Adrian frowned slightly. "I thought we already went through this," he said, his tone not unkind but still guarded. Hannah didn't flinch. "I know you've been hiding your pain, Mr. Cole, but it's okay to let people in. It's okay to ask for help. Adrian's heart clenched at the truth in her words. He had built a wall around himself for so long, thinking that if he just kept everyone at a distance, they wouldn't see the cracks in his armor. But now, Hannah was standing here, reminding him that walls only kept people out. They didn't protect anyone. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted, staring down at the coffee cup she had placed on the table. His hand shook slightly as he reached for it, the weight of his emotions almost too much to bear. Hannah's eyes softened with understanding. "You don't have to fix everything all at once, Mr. Cole. Just take the first step. It's enough to start." He looked at her, the words striking deeper than he expected. It wasn't a solution he was looking for. It was simply someone who understood, someone who saw the cracks in his armor and didn't turn away. That evening, as Adrian sat alone in his study once more, he couldn't shake the feeling that something in him was changing. The walls that had kept him isolated for so long were crumbling bit by bit. He had been so focused on his career, on amassing wealth and power, thinking that would fill the emptiness inside him. But it hadn't. No amount of success could replace the people he had lost or the family he had pushed away. He found himself staring at the photograph of Lily again, the image of his sister from a time before everything had gone wrong. He hadn't allowed himself to think about her for so long, but now, with every passing day, memories of her, of their childhood, of the times they had spent together, flooded his mind. Adrian reached for his phone and dialed William's number again. This time, the call connected almost instantly. "Adrian," William's voice came through, full of warmth and surprise. "You okay?" I'm not sure," Adrian replied, his voice thick with emotion. "But I want to try. I want to be there this time for Christmas, for you, for the family." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Adrian held his breath, wondering if this time it would be different. Would William push him away, or would he finally get a second chance? "Of course, Adrian," William said finally, his voice filled with emotion. "We've been waiting for you." Adrian's heart felt lighter than it had in years. He didn't know if this was the start of something new, but it felt like it could be. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing: he couldn't keep running from his past. The next morning, Adrian woke up early, his mind still reeling from the conversation with William. He didn't know what to expect when he arrived at his brother's house, but the thought of being with family, something so foreign to him now, filled him with both excitement and anxiety. He dressed in a dark suit, the same suit he had worn for business meetings countless times, but today it felt different. This wasn't a meeting. This wasn't about deals or power. This was about something much more important: reconnecting with the people he had shut out for so long. As he drove to William's house, the world outside seemed to shift. The snow-covered streets looked softer, the holiday lights brighter, as if everything was waking up to something new. It was strange, this feeling of hope. He hadn't felt it in so long. When he finally arrived at William's house, he hesitated for a moment at the door. He was nervous, unsure of what to expect. But when the door opened, there was William, standing there with a wide smile on his face. "Adrian," William said, pulling him into a warm hug, "I'm so glad you came." Adrian felt something in his chest loosen, the years of guilt and regret starting to melt away. Maybe, just maybe, this was the first step to healing. Adrian stepped into William's warm, bustling home, and for a moment he felt like a stranger in a world he used to know. The lights were soft, the scent of roasted turkey filled the air, and laughter echoed from the living room. It wasn't extravagant like his mansion. It wasn't polished or perfect, but it felt alive. The warmth of the room seeped into him slowly, stirring something he hadn't felt in years. William led him deeper inside, placing a steady hand on his back. "Come on. Mom is going to collapse when she sees you." Adrian exhaled shakily, trying to ready himself. Vulnerability was something he had forgotten how to embrace, but today something in him felt different, softer. The familiar dread he usually carried had loosened, replaced with a cautious kind of hope he didn't know how to manage. When they stepped into the living room, his mother rose from the couch so abruptly she nearly spilled her drink. Her hands covered her mouth, trembling, eyes glistening. "Adrian, my boy." He froze on the spot. He hadn't heard that tone, full of relief, love, disbelief, in 12 long years, before tragedy took over their lives, before his heart closed off. She rushed to him, arms wrapping around him tightly. He stood still for a second, unsure what to do, then slowly closed his arms around her. She felt smaller than he remembered, more fragile, and he wondered how much pain he had caused by disappearing into work, shutting everyone out to avoid feeling anything. "You came," she whispered. "I prayed you would every year." His voice shook. "I'm sorry, I should have been here." His father approached next, stoic, firm, rarely emotional, but now his eyes glistened. He offered a handshake but pulled Adrian straight into a tight hug instead. "We missed you, son." A lump formed in Adrian's throat. "I missed you too." They all settled in the living room and the warmth became almost overwhelming. Stories flowed, jokes resurfaced, old memories resurfaced. They welcomed him without hesitation, without judgment. And yet, through the laughter, his mind drifted back, again and again, to Hannah. The way she spoke so softly, yet so boldly. The way she urged him to reach out. The quiet understanding in her eyes. The strange familiarity every time he looked at her. It was unsettling, like a buried truth pushing up through his memories. Back at the mansion, Hannah paced her small room restlessly. The bracelet lay on her bed, the metal cool and faded. Every time she stared at it, a sharp tremor ran through her. She had no explanation for the memories flashing in her mind, fragmented moments that felt both foreign and hers at the same time. She tried to steady her breathing, but her chest tightened. Was it possible? No, it couldn't be. But she remembered being told she was found. She remembered the evasive answers from the couple who raised her. She remembered the nightmares, blurry scenes of crying, yelling, the back of a van. And she remembered a boy's voice calling her little star, a voice she had buried so deeply it felt like a dream. The girl in the photograph had a scar, the same one she had, the curve of the eyebrow, the softness in the gaze. She saw herself in that child. She sank onto the edge of the bed, fingers gripping the bracelet so tightly it pressed into her skin. She had to tell Adrian, even if it destroyed both of them. At William's house, Adrian tried to focus on the present, but the ache in his chest grew. The joy of being reunited with his family mixed with an unsettling pull, one that pointed back to the mansion, to the maid who had somehow become the center of his world. The feeling he had around Hannah wasn't simple. It wasn't attraction or admiration. It was familiarity. A familiarity so deep it frightened him. When his mother stepped into the kitchen, he followed silently. "Mom," he said softly, "can I ask you something?" She turned with a gentle smile. "Of course, dear." He hesitated. "Do you ever feel like Lily might still be alive?" The smile on her face faltered. Her eyes filled instantly, whether from love or pain he couldn't tell. "Adrian," she whispered, "we searched for years. The police, the investigators, we hoped every day, but the truth nearly destroyed us." Her voice cracked. "I don't know if I can reopen that wound." Shame crossed his features. "I'm sorry, forget I asked." She placed a trembling hand on his. "You never have to hide your heart from me, but we must be ready for all possibilities." He nodded, but inside, something twisted tighter. That night the drive back to the mansion felt long and heavy. The snow fell in slow spirals, reflecting his own swirling emotions. He had missed his family deeply, but the night wasn't over. Something else awaited him, something that tugged at him with urgency. When he stepped into the mansion, he expected silence. Instead, he felt tension in the air. "Hannah," he called softly. No answer. He moved down the hallway until he saw her seated on the grand staircase, clutching something against her chest. Her shoulders shook with quiet sobs. His heart lurched. "Hannah, what happened?" She lifted her face, eyes red and swollen. I need to tell you something," she whispered, "but I'm terrified." He stepped closer, kneeling before her. "You don't have to be afraid of me. Whatever it is, you can tell me." Her shaking hands slowly opened. The bracelet lay in her palms. A bracelet he had seen every night before bed as a child. A bracelet he had prayed would be returned someday. A bracelet he had bought for his sister on her 10th birthday. His breath hitched, his vision blurred. His voice came out broken. Where did you get this?" Her voice trembled. "I've had it since I was little. I didn't understand what it meant until I saw the photos." Adrian's hands trembled as he lifted the bracelet. The letters stared back at him, stabbing into his heart. Lily. His heart cracked open. His eyes filled. His voice barely escaped his lips. "Hannah, why do you have my sister's bracelet?" Here, batch 8 of the story, continuing with the correct names. The air felt thick with the weight of unspoken truths as Adrian sat beside Hannah. The room, once filled with silence, now pulsed with the electricity of a long-hidden secret coming to the surface. Adrian stared at the bracelet in her hand, the very same one his sister had worn. The bracelet he had thought was lost forever. The truth seemed to be teetering on the edge, just out of his grasp, but he wasn't going to let it slip away this time. "Hannah," Adrian said, his voice soft but firm, "I need to know. The bracelet, it's everything. But I can't just guess. I need to be certain. We need to find out who you really are." Hannah looked at him, her breath shaky as she nodded. She had always known there was something incomplete about her life, something missing, but hearing Adrian's words made her heart race. She had never thought of herself as anything more than the maid in his house, but in this moment, the pieces of her life seemed to be fitting together in ways she couldn't quite explain. "I'm scared, Adrian," she whispered. "What if it's all a mistake? What if I'm just someone's lost memory?" Adrian's gaze softened, his voice gentle as he reached out and placed a hand on hers. "It's okay to be scared, but we have to find the truth. I can't keep living in the unknown, and neither can you." For a moment they sat in silence, the weight of the conversation hanging between them. The mansion that once felt like a cold, lifeless shell now seemed to pulse with the promise of answers. Answers that could change everything. "I'll help you," Hannah said, her voice steadying. "I'll help you find out the truth. I don't know what's real and what's just a memory, but I promise I'll do whatever it takes." Adrian nodded, the determination in his eyes unwavering. He couldn't afford to let fear stop him anymore. He had spent so many years running from the truth, hiding behind wealth and success, thinking that those things could fix everything. But nothing had worked. His parents were gone. His sister was gone. And he had spent all this time thinking that he was the only one left to carry the burden of the past. But now, standing in front of him, was someone who might hold the key to everything. He wasn't alone anymore. The next morning, Adrian made the call to the authorities. He couldn't wait any longer. If there was even a chance that Hannah was his sister, if there was even a small glimmer of hope that he could finally have the family he had lost, then he had to know. The phone call was brief, but it was enough to set the wheels in motion. They would need to go through old records to search for any trace of Lily, any trace of the girl who had vanished all those years ago. Adrian didn't know what they would find, but the need for answers pushed him forward. Meanwhile, Hannah sat in her room, the bracelet still in her hands. She had never felt so uncertain about her past, but at the same time, something deep inside her stirred. It was as if a part of her had always known that the life she had lived wasn't her own, that she had belonged somewhere else to someone else. But the truth, whatever it was, terrified her. The knock on her door startled her, and she quickly wiped away the tear that had slipped down her cheek. "Come in," she called softly. The door creaked open and Adrian stepped inside. There was something different in his eyes now, something that hadn't been there before. He wasn't just the wealthy CEO anymore. He wasn't just the man who had closed himself off from the world. He was vulnerable. He was human. And for the first time, he wasn't afraid to face the truth. "Hey," Adrian said, his voice low, I wanted to check on you. Are you okay?" Hannah nodded, her hands trembling as she placed the bracelet on the table. "I don't know what to feel anymore, Adrian. One minute I'm just a maid here, and the next I'm not even sure who I am." Adrian walked toward her, his eyes soft with understanding. "I get it. I don't know what's going on either, but we'll find out together. You don't have to do this alone." She looked up at him, seeing something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. It wasn't just sympathy. It was a shared understanding. They had both been lost, both haunted by the past in ways they didn't fully understand. And now they were in this together. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Adrian reached out, gently placing his hand over hers. "You'll never have to find out. We're in this together, Hannah, and whatever happens next, I won't leave you." She looked at him, the weight of his words settling in her heart. For the first time in years, she felt like she wasn't alone in this world. She didn't have all the answers, and neither did he. But they had each other, and that was enough to take the next step forward. Adrian's phone rang, breaking the moment of stillness between them. He looked at the screen, his pulse quickening as he saw the number of the investigator. This was it. This was the moment they had both been waiting for. He answered the call quickly. "Adrian Cole," the voice on the other end said, "we've found something." Hannah held her breath as she watched Adrian's face, the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes narrowed as he listened. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on them both. "What did you find?" Adrian asked, his voice strained. "We've located a birth certificate," the investigator said. "A child named Lily Cole. The year matches, the location matches, but there's more. We need you to come down to the station as soon as possible. We've got something you need to see." Adrian's heart raced and he looked at Hannah. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with uncertainty. This could be it. This could be the moment they had been waiting for. "We'll be there," Adrian said quickly before hanging up the phone. He turned to Hannah, his heart pounding in his chest. "Are you ready?" She nodded, her breath shaky but her resolve stronger than ever. "I don't know what we'll find, but I'm ready to know the truth." Together they left the room, the weight of the unknown heavy on their shoulders. But for the first time in years, Adrian felt a flicker of hope. They were about to uncover a truth that had been buried for so long, and no matter what it was, they would face it together. As they stepped into the car, the snow continued to fall softly outside, and for the first time in a long while, Adrian felt like the world was full of possibilities. The drive back from the station was quieter than it had been when they first arrived. The snow outside had intensified, blanketing the world in a soft, white haze, but inside the car, there was a strange stillness between Adrian and Hannah. Neither of them spoke much. The weight of the discovery was too heavy to put into words. Adrian's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, none of them fully formed. His sister Lily was alive. He hadn't believed it for so long, convinced that she was gone forever. But now the evidence was irrefutable. The photo, the bracelet, the birth certificate, it all pointed to one undeniable truth. But there were still so many unanswered questions. Questions that gnawed at him, demanding answers. How had this happened? How had Lily disappeared without a trace, only to be found and raised by strangers? And why hadn't anyone told him the truth sooner? The questions were suffocating, and Adrian didn't know where to start. Hannah, sitting beside him, seemed to be in her own world, her eyes fixed on the road ahead but her mind clearly elsewhere. He glanced at her and saw the confusion in her eyes, the same confusion that mirrored his own. She had spent her entire life unaware of the truth, carrying with her a past that wasn't her own. But now she had a family, a brother, a past that could no longer be denied. They reached the mansion, and Adrian parked the car in the circular driveway. The lights from the house glowed faintly in the distance, casting long shadows across the snow-covered grounds. He turned off the engine, but neither of them made a move to get out. Hannah was the first to break the silence. "I don't know what to say," she said softly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "I don't know how to process all of this." Adrian nodded, staring out the windshield. "Neither do I," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I've spent 12 years thinking my sister was gone. I thought I'd lost everything, and now it feels like I'm living in some kind of dream." Hannah looked at him, her eyes full of empathy. "It's not a dream, Adrian, it's real. You found her. You found your family again." He turned to her then, his eyes searching hers. "But what about you? What about your life, your past? Everything has changed for both of us." Hannah's gaze softened and she looked down at the bracelet still clutched in her hand. "I don't know what my past is anymore, but I know one thing for sure, I'm not alone anymore. I have a family, I have you." Adrian felt a tightness in his chest at her words. She was right. For the first time in so long, he didn't feel like he was standing alone in the world. There was a connection now, something unspoken but undeniable. It wasn't just the past that was changing, it was the future. "I don't know what's going to happen next," Adrian said, his voice filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "But I can't go back to the way things were. I can't keep hiding from the past." Hannah nodded, her gaze steady. "Then we'll face it together. We'll find the answers, whatever they are, and we'll figure out how to move forward." The weight of her words settled on him, grounding him in a way that he hadn't felt in years. For so long, he had been running away from everything, his family, his past, his emotions. But now he didn't have to run anymore. There was no more hiding. Whatever came next, they would face it together. They stepped out of the car and into the cold, the quiet of the night enveloping them. Adrian stood for a moment, taking in the sight of the mansion before him. It was a beautiful place, one that should have been filled with warmth and laughter. But for so long, it had been a prison to him, a reminder of everything he had lost. Now it felt different, less like a home and more like a place waiting to be filled with new memories. "I don't think I can stay here," Adrian said suddenly, the thought coming to him with clarity. "I don't want to live in this house anymore. Not like this." Hannah turned to him, surprise crossing her features. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Adrian said, taking a deep breath, "I want to move forward. I want to leave this place behind and start fresh. I want to be closer to my family. I want to heal." Hannah smiled softly. "I think that's a good idea. You don't have to carry the weight of all of this by yourself anymore." Adrian nodded, the decision settling deep in his chest. "I can't stay here, not after everything that's happened. It's time to move on." The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Adrian contacted his brother, William, and arranged for a meeting. He hadn't seen him in years, and the thought of reconnecting with his family brought a mixture of excitement and nervousness. There was so much to make up for, so many years lost. But he knew it was time to rebuild those relationships, to fix what had been broken. Meanwhile, Hannah continued to search for more answers, digging through the papers and files she had collected, trying to piece together the story of her past. Every day, more memories came rushing back, small flashes, fragmented images that didn't make sense at first but slowly began to form a clearer picture. She didn't know if she would ever truly understand everything that had happened, but she was determined to find out. As the days passed, Adrian and Hannah grew closer, their shared journey binding them in ways they hadn't expected. They spent time together, talking about the past, the future, and everything in between. For the first time in a long while, Adrian felt like he was truly living, no longer trapped in the prison of his own grief. One evening, as they sat in the living room of the mansion, the warmth of the fire crackling softly in the background, Adrian looked at Hannah. "Do you think we'll ever get all the answers we're looking for?" Hannah smiled, her eyes reflecting the flickering light of the fire. "I don't know, but I think that's okay. We'll keep searching, and whatever happens, we'll face it together." Adrian felt a sense of peace settle over him. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid. He had found his family again, and with them, a future he could finally embrace. And with Hannah by his side, he knew they could face whatever came next together.